Welcome to episode 7 of The Christian Atheist, The Machinery of the Looking Glass, Part 3, Lessons from Immanuel Kant. In this edition of The Christian Atheist, we are continuing to lay out my journey to the looking glass in July of 2019, when I turned my back on 25 years of atheism. Most of my philosophical study and other dissertation-related research occurred in the years between my turn to atheism and earning my PhD from the University of California, Irvine in 2004. My graduate interests and studies were founded on the work of Immanuel Kant, who remains a philosophical hero for me. Kant published his seminal text, The Critique of Pure Reason, in 1781. Understanding Kant's philosophical project in historical context is vital to understanding his accomplishments. The age of science was well underway, and political and social upheaval, the French Revolution was on the horizon, were everywhere evident. Science and philosophy in Kant's day had combined to create a profound challenge to the traditional worldview, including religious faith and the possibility of morality. There was a heady hubris that all questions would be answered, that scientific rationalism would sweep away all superstition and usher in a new age, a utopia. There was an increasing understanding of the world as mechanism, that all things, including human beings, might be understood as deterministic parts of a complex, but rationally explicable, whole, and that it was the expansion of human knowledge to comprehensive understanding that would solve all of our issues. The role of individual humans in such a dispensation would be to shut up and fall in line with those who know better. Kant rightly saw the devastatingly anti-human destruction that such a necessitarian outlook might wreak on humanity. To see it ourselves, we need only think of the 20th century's various incarnations of this doctrine. Maoist China, the Bolshevik Revolution, Nazi Germany, Pol Pot, Stalin and his lineage's socialist and communist pretensions, etc. Remembering last week's Christian Atheist, we might also include Plato's Republic in the list, and thereby realize that this tendency toward totalitarian thinking, often followed by totalitarian action, is one of the perennial traps into which human reason falls. Kant and Socrates hold much in common in terms of philosophical projects. Kant said this: "The critique of pure reason will render an important service to reason by leading the student to apply his powers to the cultivation of genuine science, instead of wasting them, as at present, on speculations which can never lead to any result, or on the idle attempt to invent new ideas and opinions. But, above all, it will confer an inestimable benefit on morality and religion, by showing that all the objections urged against them may be silenced forever by the Socratic method. That is to say, by proving the ignorance of the objector. For as the world has never been, and no doubt never will be without a system of metaphysics of one kind or another, it is the highest and weightiest concern of philosophy to render it powerless for harm by closing up the sources of error. As we saw last week, Socrates was concerned that knowledge be carefully screened, that the test of experience and life were the best indicators of true knowledge, truth, seeing things aright so that one might live well, knowing and accepting the limitations of knowledge. These are concerns common to Kant, Socrates, and, as we shall see next week, Jean-Paul Sartre. Knowledge, for Kant, was one of several uses to which reason might apply itself, and not, he thought, the most important. One of Kant's primary concerns, then, in the Critique of Pure Reason was to, following on the quote above, render metaphysical speculation powerless for harm by closing up the sources for error, by means of the Socratic method, by proving the ignorance of the objector. There are in particular three objects that Kant is concerned to find conceptual space for, that he feels are threatened by the scientific necessitarianism of his day: God, freedom of the will, and the immortality of the human soul. These things, Kant says, can never be known by reason, as they are not encounterable as objects in our world, but are, nevertheless, thinkable. In fact, in order to allow for the possibility of ethics, they must be thinkable, but they can't be known, as knowledge would destroy the very essence of the type of thing that these are to finite human beings like us: open possibles. If, for instance, knowledge were the regulatory concept for ethics, we would not have a choice of open possibles, which means we have no ethical choice at all, since choice involves a field of open possibles from which to choose. Knowledge, that is, in application to morality, destroys morality for beings like us. Likewise, a God that is knowable is finite, and thus not God. God and freedom of the will can only be believed, not known. We may live our lives and act as if they are true or real, but we cannot know that they are. We are, then, in a position to understand a famous passage from Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, the second edition, in the second edition preface. He says this: I cannot even make the assumption, as the practical interests of morality require, of God, freedom, and immortality, if I do not deprive speculative reason of its pretensions to transcendent insight. For to arrive at these, it must make use of principles which, in fact, extend only to the objects of possible experience, and which cannot be applied to objects beyond this sphere without converting them into phenomena, and thus rendering the practical extension of pure reason impossible. I must, therefore, abolish knowledge to make room for belief. The dogmatism of metaphysics, that is, the presumption that it is possible to advance in metaphysics without previous criticism, is the true source of the unbelief, always dogmatic, which militates against morality. I must confess, still somewhat dubious of the application of this passage to the concepts of God and immortality of the soul as necessary to morality. But its point about freedom of the will, and the necessity of faith in it as required by morality, seems ironclad to me. It is simply true that we can conceive of an anthropology in which the human being is entirely determined, and for which, then, morality is illusory. But we can also think of one in which the human being possesses freedom of the will. If we deny knowledge of which of these competing visions is true, that is, the transcendent insight that Kant seeks to deprive speculative reason of its pretensions to, then we have a free choice of possibles, one of which preserves morality, while the other destroys it. To act, then, as if morality is real, is to believe that it is, to have faith. And I would argue that this presumption is one that is quite nearly universal in human practice, if not always in rationalized accounts of human experience. Note that it is only by denying knowledge to transcendent insight that faith in freedom becomes possible. But that it is possible is given in the faith practice of every living human being. Thus, we can have a rational faith that human beings are free moral agents. These considerations revolutionized my understanding of the world in which I live. Not least because philosophy more and more came to be motivated, for me, by how well it reflected human existence as we live it. Given a choice between exercising faith in a world in which I am not free to choose and act, and faith in a world in which I am, I will choose freedom every time, for aesthetic and practical reasons at the very least. Faith, on this understanding, is an everyday reality in all sorts of contexts. For every time we choose, we are exercising faith, not knowledge, in something. As we always face an indeterminate outcome to our choices. Limiting our claims to knowledge, indeed, makes room for faith. I can know that my wife is beside me, but I can only believe that she loves me. Although Kant did not convince me that I should have faith in God as an atheist with these considerations, I remained, after all, free to choose. He did convince me that faith is a human universal that regulates our everyday, and that human knowledge, in reinforcement of Socrates' claim, is far more limited, and the pretensions of reason far more potentially dangerous, going even to denying human morality, than most of us usually suppose. I, too, felt the overpowering need to find a way to make the pretensions of reason in our day powerless to harm. Though I feared, and still fear, we are losing that battle, and badly. With Kant's account of knowledge and faith, we have progressed well on the path to that fateful day in July of 2019 when I leaped back through the looking glass to faith in God. If I am seeing clearly, I will have only 2 more editions of The Christian Atheist devoted to laying out the machinery of the looking glass before I can bring it all together. I beg your indulgence until that moment, and your questions, comments, and concerns to help me clarify what I've already presented. If you found this edition to be particularly difficult to understand, I sincerely apologize. It is hard to compact such difficult material into a manageable but understandable size. To aid understanding, I have 2 websites that I think would be of immense help in clarifying my position on this material. The first is relatively easy for the layman to understand, and the second, though more technical, is of immense value in grasping the overall structure of Kantian thought. These links will also appear in the video description below. As always, if you haven't watched the preceding editions of The Christian Atheist, I encourage you to do so now. And please subscribe to our channel to be sure not to miss the upcoming episodes. First, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And let us know what you'd like to hear from us by commenting. Wise Words for Your Occasion is located in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but we're willing to travel. For inquiries or to book an occasion, go to wisewordsforyouroccasion.wordpress.com or see us on Facebook or check out our YouTube channel. You'll find links to all 3 in this post.